Rachel Morgan's fingers flew across the keyboard, the glow of her dual monitors reflecting in her tired eyes. The Seattle office was nearly empty at this hour, but her department was racing toward a brutal deadline. 3 reports were due by morning, and the spreadsheet columns seemed endless. She sipped lukewarm coffee, tried to ignore the pounding behind her eyes, and kept typing. That was when her phone, face down on the desk, began to buzz violently. She almost didn't look, assuming it was a Slack notification or an automated reminder. But when she flipped the phone, her heart clenched. Mom. The name glared on the screen, and dread knotted instantly in her stomach. Her mother never called. Antonia Morgan preferred short texts, usually when she needed money or a favor Rachel couldn't refuse. For her to call now, something had to be wrong. Rachel pressed accept. Mom. A faint, broken voice trickled through the line. Rachel, sweetheart, it's bad. My chest, she gasped audibly, it hurts. I can't breathe right. Everything is spinning. Rachel bolted upright in her chair, blood rushing to her face. What? Are you having chest pain? Mom, do I need to call 911 for you? Antonia groaned, her breathing heavy and uneven, just like the dramatized sound bites Rachel had only ever heard on medical shows. I don't want to scare you, but it's never been this bad. I'm so alone, Rachel. Your father's at work, and Lydia. Rachel seized on the one solution that made sense. Then call Lydia. She's 5 minutes away from you. She can drive you to the ER faster than an ambulance. A long pause, then a sigh so heavy Rachel could practically feel it pressing through the line. Your sister's drowning with the kids. She can't leave them. She told me she can't, honey. And I don't want to burden her. Rachel bit her lip until she tasted blood. Of course, Lydia Carter, the golden child, the one their parents doted on endlessly, had 3 children under 10 and a husband who worked late. She was always too busy when it came to helping their mother. But Rachel? She was single, living alone in Seattle. She was always the one expected to drop everything. Still, this was her mother's health. And if it was what Rachel feared, a heart attack, maybe a stroke, then minutes mattered. The panic in Antonia's voice clawed at her. Rachel, her mother whispered, voice breaking. I need you. I can't do this alone. Please fly home. Just for a little while. A week, maybe 2. Until I feel stronger. The office around Rachel faded. The spreadsheets, the deadlines, the cold fluorescent lights. All of it blurred. All she could hear was her mother's shallow breathing and the fragile tremor in her tone. Rachel's throat tightened. Mom, I'm in the middle of a project. My team is counting on me. And you want me to fly across the country? That's 15 hours at least. I wouldn't ask, Antonia murmured, her voice cracking like fine china. If it wasn't serious, I just don't want to die here alone. Not like this. Rachel's chest caved under the weight of guilt. The word die echoed in her ears, squeezing out rational thought. For a moment, she imagined her mother slumped in the living room of their old house in Charlotte, clutching her chest, eyes rolled back. No neighbors to help, no one to notice. Just the awful silence that follows when a life stops mid-breath. Don't say that, Rachel choked out. I'll figure something out. Just, please, promise me if it gets worse. You'll call 911 immediately. Her mother exhaled as though a burden had lifted. Oh, thank you, sweetheart. I knew I could count on you. I'll hold on until you get here. Please come as soon as you can. The line went quiet except for the faint wheeze of her mother's breathing. Rachel sat frozen, staring at the blinking cursor on her monitor, the weight of 1,000 choices pressing down on her shoulders. Deadlines and promotions on one side, her mother's life on the other. By the time she hung up, she already knew what she had to do. Rachel gathered her courage, pushed back from her desk, and walked toward her manager's office. She knocked once, then stepped inside. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. I need emergency leave, she said. Family medical situation in Charlotte. I'll be gone, maybe 2 weeks. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Her boss studied her for a long moment, then gave a resigned nod. Family comes first. Book the flight. Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat, murmured a thank you, and stepped back into the hallway. Already, her phone buzzed with another text from her mother. Thank you, darling. I knew you'd come. Rachel clutched the phone to her chest, a knot of dread twisting inside her. She didn't know how she would explain this to her team, how she would survive the cross-country flight, or what exactly she'd find waiting for her in Charlotte. All she knew was that she had no choice. The office lights glared against the dark Seattle sky as Rachel returned to her desk. Her manager's words, "Family comes first," still echoed in her mind. The weight of that truth pressed down on her chest like an anchor. She had done the right thing, she told herself. But the moment she began opening travel websites, dread clawed deeper into her stomach. Flights from Seattle to Charlotte weren't short under the best of circumstances. Direct routes were expensive and scarce, most funneled through Dallas or Atlanta. Rachel's eyes blurred as she scanned departure boards. Every option meant delays, long layovers, missed sleep, and hours upon hours of recycled air. The soonest she could leave was Saturday morning, Seattle to Dallas, 4-hour layover, then on to Charlotte. Total travel time? 15.5 hours, if there were no delays. She booked it with trembling fingers, the confirmation email pinging her inbox like a final verdict. By the time Rachel got back to her apartment, midnight had settled over the city. She pulled her small roller suitcase from the closet, tossing clothes in without thought, 2 pairs of slacks, a couple sweaters, toiletries in a worn Ziploc. She moved mechanically, folding shirts while her mind replayed her mother's fragile voice. My chest hurts. I can't breathe. Each word burned deeper until Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, suitcase open at her feet, wondering if she was walking into a nightmare. Sleep never really came. She dozed in fragments, the shrill alarm dragging her up at 4 in the morning. She splashed water on her face, tied her hair back, and stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Pale, exhausted, and bracing for a journey she didn't want to make. But family wasn't something you abandoned. Not when the word heart attack loomed over every thought. At SeaTac Airport, Rachel joined the endless shuffle through TSA lines, clutching her boarding pass as though it might dissolve. The overhead speaker barked flight numbers and gate changes, a relentless reminder that her carefully timed plan could fall apart at any moment. The first leg to Dallas was cramped, her seat wedged between a college student scrolling TikTok and a businessman who commandeered the shared armrest without apology. Rachel closed her eyes, earbuds in, but every vibration of turbulence jolted her awake. By the time the plane touched down, her nerves were frayed raw. Dallas-Fort Worth was chaos. Families shouting, travelers sprinting across terminals, the scent of fried food hanging heavy in the air. Rachel dragged her suitcase through the maze, only to discover her connecting flight had been delayed by 2 more hours. She sank into a plastic chair at the gate, her body aching, and stared out at the rain streaking across the tarmac. She tried to distract herself with work emails, but the words refused to stick. Instead, memories unspooled, sharper than she expected. It had been 4 years since she last set foot in Charlotte. For years since she stood in her parents' house, since she'd sat across the dinner table from Lydia. That distance hadn't been an accident, it had been survival. The childhood memories were still vivid. 12-year-old Rachel washing dishes, while Lydia went out with friends, 16-year-old Rachel bagging groceries to pay for her textbooks, while Lydia breezed through private school on her parents' dime. Even in adulthood, nothing had changed. Calls from her parents almost always ended in requests for money, never simple questions about her life. Flying back now felt like volunteering to reopen a wound that had just begun to scar. When her connecting flight finally boarded, she shuffled down the narrow aisle, collapsed into her seat, and let her head rest against the cold window. The drone of the engines filled her ears, and exhaustion finally pulled her under. When she woke, the plane was descending through a sheet of gray clouds, the announcement chiming overhead. "Welcome to Charlotte Douglas International Airport." Rachel's heart thumped painfully. She checked her watch. Almost 16 hours since she'd left her apartment. Her hands trembled as she fastened her seatbelt. The city below spread out in patches of light, familiar yet foreign. She swallowed hard, bracing herself. In a few minutes, she would see her mother. She would face her family, and she had no idea what awaited her beyond the arrival gates. The neighborhood looked exactly as Rachel remembered it: quiet streets lined with dogwoods, porches with rocking chairs, the same cracked sidewalk she had walked as a teenager. Dragging her suitcase up the narrow walkway, she felt her stomach twist into knots. Every step closer to the door magnified the dread. If her mother had truly been as sick as she claimed, she might find her collapsed on the floor, waiting desperately for help. Rachel knocked, her knuckles tight against the faded wood. The door swung open almost instantly, and there stood Antonia Morgan, not pale, not hunched over, not gasping for air. Instead, she was dressed in a neatly pressed blouse, her hair curled, makeup carefully applied, lipstick a deep berry shade. She looked radiant, almost celebratory, as though preparing for a luncheon, not clinging to life. Rachel froze on the porch, suitcase handle still clutched in her hand. "Mom." "Oh, Rachel." Antonia's eyes widened with delight, not weakness. She grabbed her daughter's arm and pulled her inside with surprising strength. "You made it. Thank goodness. Take off your coat, sweetheart. The house has missed you." Rachel's mind scrambled to make sense of the sight before her. "Wait, are you okay? The chest pain? The dizziness?" Antonia waved her hand lightly, dismissing the concern. "Oh, that. I might have exaggerated a little. You wouldn't have come otherwise." The words landed like stones in Rachel's stomach. Exaggerated. She had flown across the country in a panic, abandoned her job in the middle of a critical deadline, because her mother had pretended to be on the brink of collapse. From the living room came laughter and voices. When Rachel followed, she found the rest of the family gathered comfortably. Her father, Nicholas, sat in his recliner, scrolling through his phone. He looked up briefly, offered a neutral, "Hey kiddo, how was the flight?" and went back to reading headlines. On the sofa, Lydia Carter sat with her husband, Michael. Their 3 children sprawled across the cushions and carpet. Eva, the eldest, smiled shyly. Thomas clutched a toy truck, revving it across the floor. Little Zoe toddled unsteadily, reaching for her mother's lap. Lydia's smile curved in that too-perfect way that always carried an undertone of superiority. "Rachel, you actually came. I wasn't sure you'd do it. What with your important job out west." Rachel blinked. Her mother stood proudly at the center of the room, announcing with glee, "Well, we've got wonderful news. We're going to Florida. 10 whole days. The resort's booked, the flights are ready, everything's set. But, of course, someone has to stay with the children." She clasped her hands together, eyes glinting. "And that someone is you." The words slammed into Rachel harder than turbulence. She looked from her mother to Lydia, then to Michael, waiting for any sign that this was a joke. None came. Lydia simply reached for Zoe's pacifier, serene as a queen, while Michael shifted in his seat, already pulling up photos of beaches on his phone. Rachel's throat went dry. "You lied. You told me you were sick, that you couldn't breathe." Antonia laughed lightly, as if the deception were trivial. "Darling, don't be dramatic. You know I couldn't have convinced you otherwise. And family helps family. Lydia and Michael haven't had a vacation in years. Your father and I, we deserve one too. And you're here now, so it all works out perfectly." Nicholas didn't look up from his phone. "It's only 10 days, Rachel. You'll manage." Her pulse hammered in her ears. She thought of the 16 hours in transit, the exhaustion etched into her bones, the panic that had driven her across the country. All of it for this, to be turned into an unpaid babysitter, manipulated into abandoning her life because her family had decided her time was less valuable than theirs. Lydia's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. The kids' schedules are on the fridge. Eva has soccer practice Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thomas is picky. He won't eat from anyone else's plate. And Zoe still wakes up some nights. But you'll figure it out. You always do. The certainty in her tone made Rachel's stomach churn. They had never asked. They had expected. Rachel stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the people who should have loved her most, but instead looked at her as a tool, reliable, disposable, always available. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Her chest tightened, and she fought the urge to scream, to demand why her worth to them only ever seemed to come in moments of convenience. Instead, she swallowed hard, forced her expression into neutrality, and whispered, "Right? Of course." But inside, something cracked. The betrayal was too sharp, too deliberate to ignore. And for the first time, Rachel felt not just disappointment, but fury. The next morning, as sunlight streamed weakly through the blinds, Rachel walked into the kitchen, still dazed from jet lag. She found Lydia already waiting at the table, a neatly printed sheet in hand. Without a word, Lydia slid it across the counter. Rachel picked it up. It wasn't a welcome home note or even a thank you. It was a schedule, hour by hour, line by line, detailing the care of 3 children who weren't hers. Breakfast at 7, Lydia said crisply, tapping the page. Eva likes oatmeal with raisins. Thomas needs his eggs cut into small pieces, or he won't touch them. Zoe has her formula at 8 sharp. Mid-morning nap. Lunch is at noon. Thomas won't share, so make sure his plate is separate. Rachel blinked at the sheet. It read like a military operation. School drop-offs, soccer practice, playdates, bedtime routines, medication reminders. Even notes about which blanket Zoe needed to fall asleep. Lydia went on, her tone casual, as if she were doing Rachel a favor. Eva has soccer twice a week. You'll need to drive her. Practice is on the south side. Thomas has a mild allergy, so don't give him strawberries. And Zoe gets cranky if she doesn't nap exactly on time. It's all there. Rachel looked up. You realize I don't have a car here, right? Michael, leaning against the doorway, shrugged. Borrow Mom's or Dad's. It's not complicated. Antonia entered just then, her arms full of neatly folded laundry. She set it on the counter and smiled, as though this whole arrangement were perfectly reasonable. Rachel, you've always been so reliable. We knew you'd step up. You sit behind a computer all day in Seattle. You don't understand what real exhaustion is like until you've wrangled 3 kids. The dismissal in her voice sliced deeper than Rachel expected. Office work, deadlines, the 16-hour journey across the country. All of it erased in a single sentence. Rachel stared at the paper, her fingers trembling as old memories bled through. Memories she had buried but never forgotten. She was 12 again, standing on a chair to scrub dishes while Lydia laughed with friends on the porch. She was 16, pulling the closing shift at the grocery store, her hands raw from bagging produce, while Lydia prepared for homecoming dances and summer camps her parents happily funded. Rachel remembered stuffing tip money into an envelope marked college fund, while Lydia breezed through private school on their parents' checkbook. By 19, Rachel was paying her own way through a state university, juggling 2 part-time jobs. Lydia, meanwhile, called home from a dorm her parents had covered, never worrying about tuition or bills. Even now, the pattern hadn't changed. Lydia received the indulgence of endless support. Rachel was expected to pick up the pieces. The air in the kitchen felt heavy. Rachel folded the schedule, slowly tucking it under her palm. So this is it? You tricked me into flying across the country to be, what? Your nanny. Lydia tilted her head, her smile patronizing. Don't be so dramatic. Your family. And family helps family. Michael chuckled under his breath. Besides, it's only 10 days. You'll live. Nicholas, seated at the table with his newspaper, grunted in agreement. You're not chained to an assembly line. You'll manage. Consider it a break from staring at screens all day. Rachel's chest burned. A break? 16 hours of travel. Abandoned projects at work. All because her family had decided she was expendable. She thought of the apartment in Seattle, quiet, hers alone. Her job, her independence. None of it mattered here. In this house, she was still the afterthought, the utility, the one who could be counted on to sacrifice without complaint. Rachel forced herself to stand straighter, to mask the fury coiling inside. Right, she said evenly, though her voice quivered at the edges. I'll manage. But inside, the familiar ache of injustice surged. It wasn't just about the children or the trip to Florida. It was about every year of her life when she had been the one cleaning, working, paying, sacrificing, while Lydia had been showered with favor and ease. For the first time in years, Rachel didn't just feel used. She felt betrayed, and though she didn't show it, something inside her had begun to shift. That night, after the children were tucked in and the house had gone quiet, Rachel slipped into what had once been her bedroom. The space no longer felt like hers. Boxes were stacked against the walls, old furniture pushed into corners. The bed creaked under her weight. She sat cross-legged with her laptop balanced in front of her, the glow casting sharp lines across her tired face. Her phone lay beside her. For a long time, she just stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, she dialed. Rachel. The familiar voice of her manager, Mr. Peterson, filled the line. How's your mom? Is she okay? Rachel closed her eyes, shame rising in her throat. Not exactly how I thought, she admitted. Then, haltingly, she spilled everything. The frantic call about chest pain, the 16-hour journey, and the revelation that her mother wasn't sick at all, just scheming to have her watch Lydia's kids while the family vacationed in Florida. On the other end, silence stretched. Finally, Mr. Peterson let out a low whistle. That's beyond the pale. I'm so sorry, Rachel said quickly. I pulled myself off the project for this. I thought it was an emergency. Don't apologize, he cut in firmly. You acted on what you knew. Anyone would have done the same. But Rachel, listen to me. You already took the time off. Use it for yourself. She blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? You've been working nonstop. You haven't taken a real vacation in years. If your family's just using you, don't waste the time on them. Take it back. Go somewhere for yourself. The line went quiet again. Rachel stared at the laptop screen, her pulse quickening. The idea was outrageous, unthinkable, and yet it sparked something deep inside her. Why should she be the family's babysitter? Why should her sacrifices always be taken for granted? If they could lie, manipulate, and steal her time, then maybe she could turn the tables. Her fingers moved almost without her. She typed, Cancun all-inclusive resort packages. The images exploded across her screen. Turquoise water, palm trees swaying, white sand glowing under the sun. Oceanfront suites, swim-up bars, buffets piled high with food she hadn't let herself splurge on in years. Rachel's chest rose and fell, the anger inside her sharpening into resolve. If her family wanted to manipulate her into being their nanny, then they would discover she wasn't so predictable anymore. She compared flights, scrolling feverishly. There it was, a morning departure from Charlotte to Cancun, scheduled on the very same day her family would be heading to Florida. Her heart thudded as she clicked book now. The confirmation email pinged. Just like that, she had rewritten her fate. Rachel leaned back, staring at the ceiling, a slow smile curling across her lips for the first time in days. But she wasn't done yet. She opened another tab, browsing through resort amenities. A swim-up suite was still available. She booked it without hesitation. Then came the fun part, preparing. The next morning, while her mother and Lydia fussed over travel itineraries, Rachel slipped away to a nearby shopping center. She bought a new swimsuit, a wide-brimmed sun hat, sunscreen, and a bright sarong that shimmered like the Caribbean Sea. She tucked the bags deep in her suitcase, hidden beneath plain shirts and jeans, disguising them like contraband. Every item she folded sparked something in her. The rage that had carried her through the night softened, transforming into a fierce kind of clarity. She wasn't powerless. She had choices, and she was finally choosing herself. As she zipped the suitcase shut, she paused, hands resting on the fabric. She thought briefly of the kids, Eva, Thomas, little Zoe, innocent in all of this. A pang of guilt flickered, but it passed quickly, because guilt was what had kept her chained for so long. Her family had written her role for her. The reliable daughter, the sacrificial sister, the woman whose time was always worth less. But Rachel was finished with that script. She straightened, her eyes catching her reflection in the dusty mirror propped against the wall. For once, she didn't see exhaustion or resentment. She saw someone decisive, someone reclaiming her life. The decision was made, and by the time her family was boarding their flight to Florida, Rachel Morgan would already be headed south, to the turquoise waters of Cancun, free at last. The alarm chimed at 5 a.m., soft but insistent. Rachel silenced it quickly, careful not to wake anyone in the house. The air in her childhood bedroom was stale, heavy with dust and old boxes, but her suitcase waited in the corner like a silent accomplice. She moved quietly, pulling on jeans and a plain sweatshirt, dressing as if she were only stepping out for errands. The plan had been rehearsed in her mind all night. Calm face, steady voice, nothing unusual. Rachel slid her suitcase to the window and eased it open. The hinges groaned faintly and she froze, listening for footsteps. None came. Slowly, she lowered the suitcase onto the shrubs below, wincing at the muffled thud. Then she closed the window, smoothed the curtain, and turned toward the door. A soft knock startled her. Her mother's voice came through, warm and casual. "Rachel, you're up early?" Rachel pulled the door open, feigning calm. "Yeah, I thought I'd run to the store, maybe the pharmacy. Pick up some things for the kids before you leave." Antonia's face lit with pride. "You're always so thoughtful. We'll be heading to the airport around noon. Don't be long." Rachel smiled tightly. "I won't." Within minutes, she was downstairs, her father fiddling with the coffee maker, Lydia scribbling last-minute notes on a pad, Michael pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. None of them noticed as Rachel slipped through the front door, her small purse slung over her shoulder. She walked briskly around the side of the house, crouched to tug her suitcase free from the shrubs, and wheeled it down the block until she was far enough away to call a ride. The pre-dawn air was cool, the streets still empty. When the car pulled up, she slid inside, whispering to the driver, "Charlotte Douglas International, please." As the city lights blurred past, Rachel exhaled for the first time in days. She leaned back against the seat, her heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. This was really happening. At the airport, she moved quickly, check-in, baggage drop, security. Each step carried the risk of a phone call catching her off guard, but she kept her phone silenced, tucked deep in her bag. By the time she slipped her shoes back on after TSA, she allowed herself a cautious smile. She was through. No one could stop her now. Standing at her gate, she glanced at the departures board. Flight to Cancun on time. She imagined the scene back home. Her mother double-checking itineraries, Lydia herding the kids, Michael scrolling weather reports for Florida. They believed she'd be there, waiting dutifully, ready to carry the weight of their responsibilities. But Rachel wasn't waiting anymore. She bought a coffee from a kiosk, wrapped her hands around the cup, and sat near the window. Planes taxied in the pale morning light, the sound of engines vibrating through the glass. For the first time in years, she felt free. No guilt pressing down on her. No one demanding she be more, do more, sacrifice more. Just her, sitting in an airport, bound not for servitude, but for escape. Her phone buzzed once in her bag. She didn't look. Instead, she pressed it deeper inside and flipped it to airplane mode. The world could wait. When boarding was called, Rachel rose with the others, her ticket in hand. As she walked down the jet bridge, the weight she carried for so long seemed to lift, piece by piece. By the time she buckled her seatbelt and the plane rumbled toward the runway, she was smiling, a small, private smile, but real. Seattle had been her escape before. Now, Cancun would be her sanctuary. And as the plane lifted into the sky, leaving Charlotte behind, Rachel knew she had crossed a line she would never return from. By the time the plane descended over Cancun, the afternoon sun turned the water below into a sheet of liquid sapphire. Rachel pressed her forehead against the window, watching the coastline emerge. White beaches, palm trees swaying, resorts lined like palaces along the shore. It felt surreal, as though she had stepped out of the cramped, suffocating air of her family's house and into a postcard. The moment she cleared customs and retrieved her bag, a cheerful driver in a crisp, white shirt held up a placard with her resort's name. "Senorita Morgan," he asked. She nodded, and within minutes she was riding in a shuttle, the salty breeze rushing through the open window, the hum of Spanish radio filling the van. When the resort finally appeared, Rachel's breath caught. Towering white buildings gleamed against the sky, their balconies dripping with bougainvillea. Multiple pools sparkled, each fringed with lounge chairs and umbrellas. At the heart of it all, the Caribbean shimmered a blinding turquoise. Check-in was a blur of smiles and cool towels. The receptionist handed her a wristband, assuring her everything was included. Meals, drinks, endless amenities. By the time she reached her room, she was almost dizzy with relief. She opened the balcony doors, letting the ocean air sweep through, and stared at the endless horizon. Rachel slipped into the new swimsuit she had hidden in her suitcase, wrapped the sarong around her waist, and headed straight for the poolside bar. The first sip of a mango margarita was like tasting freedom itself. Sweet, sharp, and utterly intoxicating. For hours she floated between the pool and the lounge chair, sunlight warming her skin, the sound of laughter and music filling the air. No one needed her. No one demanded her. She was just another guest, another traveler soaking in the simple joy of existing. On impulse, she pulled out her phone, framed herself against the brilliant backdrop, and snapped a selfie. The photo captured her tanned face, the ocean behind her, a cocktail in hand. She uploaded it to her social feed with a simple caption. Finally, a real vacation. It didn't take long. Her phone lit up like fireworks. Dozens of missed calls. Text after text, one notification tumbling over another. From her mother, "Where are you? The kids are waiting. Answer me right now." From Lydia, "Rachel, this isn't funny. You ruined everything. Do you understand what you've done?" From her father, "Call your mother. You're being unreasonable." She scrolled briefly, scanning the growing storm of anger. The words became harsher with every message. Selfish, ungrateful, irresponsible. Lydia threatened never to forgive her. Antonia accused her of betraying the family. Even Nicholas, usually detached, sent curt demands that she fix the mess she had created. Rachel let the phone buzz in her hand, then calmly pressed the side button until the screen went dark. She slid it into her bag and leaned back in the lounge chair. The bartender refilled her glass without being asked. For the first time in her life, Rachel didn't feel crushed by their disappointment. She felt liberated by it. They had built their Florida vacation on the assumption that she would be there, obedient and silent. Without her, the entire plan crumbled. Their anger was proof that, for once, she hadn't played her assigned role. The next morning, while her family scrambled in Charlotte, Rachel was already at the resort buffet, piling her plate with tropical fruit and fresh pastries. She sipped coffee slowly, savoring every bite, while her phone, tucked safely in airplane mode, remained mercifully quiet. Later, as she floated in the infinity pool with the ocean stretching before her, she imagined Lydia frantically arranging backup plans, Antonia berating anyone who would listen, Nicholas fuming over lost money. The thought should have filled her with guilt. Instead, it filled her with something dangerously close to delight. For once, Rachel wasn't the one left exhausted and resentful while others enjoyed themselves. She was the one enjoying life while they panicked. And as the sun dipped low over the Caribbean, painting the water gold, Rachel raised her glass toward the horizon. The chaos of Charlotte felt a world away. She smiled, knowing that for the first time in years, the balance had shifted. She wasn't their doormat anymore. She was free. By the fourth day in Cancun, Rachel had fallen into a rhythm she hadn't known she craved. Long mornings on the beach, afternoons drifting between the pool and shaded cabanas, evenings tasting dishes she couldn't even pronounce. The sun had bronzed her skin, the ocean breeze tangled her hair, and for once, she felt like someone living her own life instead of carrying everyone else's burdens. But when she turned her phone back on to check her work email, the peace shattered. The screen lit up instantly, buzzing in her hand like an angry hornet's nest. 42 text messages, dozens of missed calls, voicemail after voicemail. For a moment, Rachel simply stared, her pulse quickening. She scrolled quickly. Her mother, her father, Lydia, all screaming through text in their own voices. And then the phone rang again. Mom. Rachel hesitated only a second before answering. Rachel Morgan. Antonia's voice exploded down the line, so loud Rachel had to hold the phone away from her ear. Do you have any idea what you've done? We missed our transfer. The resort charged us fees. Do you know how much money this has cost us? Rachel's jaw clenched. Hello to you too, Mom. Don't you get smart with me. You abandoned your family. Lydia had to scramble. Michael's furious. The children are devastated. All because you decided to play some cruel game. Rachel stood from the lounge chair, pacing along the poolside tiles. A cruel game? You lied to me, Mom. You told me you were sick, dying practically. You made me believe you were having a heart attack. I dropped everything, flew 16 hours across the country because I thought you needed me. And when I walked through that door, you were perfectly fine, getting ready for vacation. There was a pause on the other end, then a sharp scoff. Don't twist this around. We needed you. Lydia needed you. Family helps family. You should be grateful we trust you with the children. Rachel laughed bitterly, the sound startling even herself. Grateful? You manipulated me, Mom. You turned me into your unpaid babysitter, like you always do. I'm 30 years old, and you still treat me like the maid you never had. Antonia's voice grew shrill. You're selfish, heartless. No wonder you're alone in Seattle. Who would want to put up with that attitude? The words hit like darts, but Rachel didn't flinch this time. Instead, she let the silence stretch, let the weight of her mother's cruelty sink between them. And then, with a calmness she had never felt before, she said, You're right about one thing. I am done. Done being the family's doormat. Done being the one who sacrifices while Lydia gets everything handed to her. Done answering your calls only to be used again. Rachel. Antonia's voice faltered for the first time. No. Rachel cut in steady and clear. Listen to me. You can call me selfish, heartless, whatever you want. But I won't be your free nanny. I won't be the one you guilt into fixing every problem. You don't get to lie about your health just to trap me. That's over. On the other end, her mother's breath hitched, heavy and indignant. You've ruined everything. Our vacation, our family. Rachel snapped. A family doesn't trick one of their own into servitude. A family doesn't exploit. What you've ruined is my trust, and you'll have to live with that. Antonia's voice rose to a scream. Don't you hang up on me, Rachel. Don't you dare. But Rachel had already pulled the phone from her ear. For a moment, she stared at the screen, watching her mother's name flash red. Then, with one decisive tap, she ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. No frio acusações, no guilt, no demands. Just the sound of waves rolling against the shore, steady and soothing. Rachel set the phone on the table, screen down, and let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled, but her chest felt strangely light. For years, her mother's voice had carried the power to wound her, to make her question her worth. Not anymore. She ordered another cocktail from the bar, lifted the glass toward the horizon, and whispered to herself, "I'm free." For the first time in her life, she truly believed it. It was late evening when Rachel finally turned her phone back on again, bracing herself for the storm of notifications. Dozens of missed calls and unread messages piled up instantly, but one number stood out: Aunt Marlene. Unlike her mother or Lydia, Marlene rarely called. She wasn't the type to meddle unless it mattered. Rachel hesitated, then answered. "Hello." "Rachel, sweetheart." The voice on the other end was warm but cautious. "It's Aunt Marlene. I've been hearing, well, quite a bit from your mother. She says you ruined their trip, left everyone stranded. I wanted to hear it from you. What on earth happened?" Rachel sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing her free hand against her forehead. Of course she'd tell you that. Her voice cracked. "She didn't tell you the part where she faked being sick, did she?" There was a pause. "Faked?" "Yes," Rachel said, the words spilling out faster now. "She called me in Seattle, said her chest hurt, that she couldn't breathe, that she thought she might die. I panicked. I bought a ticket the same day, flew across the country. 16 hours, Aunt Marlene. And when I got here, she was perfectly fine. Perfect makeup, dressed to the nines. She and Lydia and Michael were just getting ready for their Florida vacation. They never wanted me to save her. They wanted me to babysit. They lied to me. They dragged me all this way under false pretenses." Silence filled the line, heavy and thoughtful. Rachel could hear the faint rustle of fabric, as if her aunt had sat down heavily in her chair. Finally, Marlene exhaled. "Well, I'll be damned. I love my sister, Rachel, but this doesn't surprise me. She's always been dramatic, always twisting things to get her way. And Lydia!" She gave a soft, rueful laugh. "Lydia could do no wrong in your parents' eyes. I noticed it years ago." Rachel's throat tightened. "You did?" "Oh, honey." Her aunt's tone softened, almost sorrowful. "You were the one helping around the house, cooking, cleaning, working jobs when you should have been enjoying your childhood. And Lydia, well, she was the princess. Everyone saw it. I used to argue with your mother about how unfair it was. She never listened." Tears pricked Rachel's eyes. For years she had convinced herself she was being oversensitive, imagining the favoritism, exaggerating the slights. Every dismissal from her parents, "You're too sensitive, stop making things up," had sunk deep into her bones. Now, hearing her aunt say it out loud, she felt something shift. "So it wasn't just me," Rachel whispered. "No, sweetheart. It wasn't just you." Marlene's voice was steady. "You weren't imagining it. You weren't being dramatic. You were being mistreated. And it breaks my heart that you carried that alone all these years." Rachel pressed a hand over her mouth, her chest shaking. Relief and grief tangled together until she could hardly breathe. For the first time, someone from her own family had acknowledged the truth. "I don't know what to do anymore," Rachel admitted. "I feel guilty, but at the same time, I feel free, like I finally took my life back." "You did," her aunt said firmly, "and you shouldn't feel guilty for refusing to be used. Sometimes people need a wake-up call. Maybe this is theirs." They spoke for a while longer, about work, about Rachel's life in Seattle, about the weather in Charlotte. But beneath every word was something Rachel had never felt from her mother or father: understanding. Genuine, unvarnished understanding. When the call ended, Rachel sat in silence, her phone resting loosely in her hand. The night outside was quiet, the waves faint in the distance. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was standing alone against her family. Someone had seen the truth. Someone believed her. And that changed everything. When Rachel stepped off the plane back in Seattle, the air felt crisper, lighter. The familiar skyline rose against the gray horizon, and for the first time in years, she didn't dread coming home. Her apartment waited for her, quiet and uncluttered, a space that belonged entirely to her. After weeks of turmoil, it felt like sanctuary. Her first morning back at work, she braced herself for judgment. But when she walked into the office, Mr. Peterson greeted her with a smile. "Good to have you back, Rachel. You did the right thing. And by the way, those reports you prepared before you left? They carried us through." The client was impressed. Relief washed over her. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into her projects, not out of desperation, but out of genuine motivation. For once, she wasn't trying to prove her worth to people who would never see it. She was working for herself, and her efforts didn't go unnoticed. By the end of the quarter, she was promoted, entrusted with leading an entire division. But Rachel didn't let her life shrink back to work alone. Cancun had cracked something open in her. She signed up for a local hiking group, joined a book club at the neighborhood library, and began to surround herself with people who valued her company rather than her usefulness. Slowly, her circle expanded. Dinners, movie nights, spontaneous road trips. She began to feel the contours of a life that was hers, not one handed to her by obligation. And then there was Ethan. They had exchanged numbers on that final night at the resort, promising vaguely to keep in touch. Rachel hadn't expected much. Vacation encounters rarely survived distance. But when her phone buzzed one evening with his name, her heart skipped. He was in town for a business conference. Would she like to grab dinner? The evening unfolded easily, conversation flowing between laughter and comfortable pauses. Ethan wasn't interested in what she could do for him. He was interested in her opinions, her ambitions, her quirks. Over time, dinners turned into weekend hikes, then into quiet evenings cooking together in her kitchen. She felt no need to perform, no pressure to bend herself into a shape someone else preferred. With Ethan, she could simply be. One afternoon, Rachel checked her mailbox and found a plain white envelope with her mother's handwriting. Inside was a check, small, but covering the money her parents had borrowed months ago and never repaid. Tucked beside it was a card. "Sorry it took so long. Hope you're doing well. Love, Mom." Rachel stared at it for a long time. It wasn't a full apology, not really. But it was something, an acknowledgement, however small, that perhaps they owed her more than endless demands. She sat at her kitchen table, card in hand, heart conflicted. Part of her longed to believe it was a first step toward change, that her parents could recognize the years of imbalance and try to repair what was broken. Another part whispered caution. A single card didn't erase decades of being overlooked, manipulated, and used. That night, she confided in Ethan. "I don't know what to make of it. Do I let them back in? Do I keep the distance?" He poured her a cup of tea and set it gently in front of her. "Only you know what's right. But remember, you don't owe them access to you just because they're family. Any relationship, even with parents, should be two-way." His words lingered long after the conversation ended. Rachel knew she wasn't ready to decide yet. The wounds were too fresh, the memories too sharp. But she also knew something had shifted inside her. She was no longer desperate for their approval. If reconciliation came, it would be on her terms. For now, she chose to keep building the life she had fought so hard to claim. And with every step, every meeting at work where her voice carried weight, every Saturday morning hike with new friends, every quiet smile across the dinner table with Ethan, Rachel felt further from the woman who had once flown 16 hours just to be used. She was no longer the family's safety net. She was her own person, and she wasn't going back. Seattle shimmered under a soft drizzle, the kind of evening where lights reflected off wet sidewalks like scattered stars. Rachel walked arm in arm with Ethan, their laughter rising above the hum of traffic as they made their way toward the little bistro tucked between two brick buildings. She had passed it countless times before, never once pausing to step inside. Now, it felt like the perfect place to mark a new chapter. Inside, the restaurant was warm, glowing with candlelight. Rachel shed her coat, smoothing her dress as Ethan pulled out a chair for her. The clink of glasses and low murmur of conversation filled the room. But for Rachel, the world had narrowed to this table, this moment. Work had settled into a rhythm she hadn't known before, a rhythm where her voice mattered, where her decisions carried weight. She had respect in her career, not because she begged for it, but because she had earned it. Outside the office, her life had widened too. Friends who invited her not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. A community she had built for herself. And Ethan, steady, kind, curious, was no longer just a man she'd met at a resort bar, but someone she could imagine beside her in the years ahead. As the waiter poured wine into their glasses, Rachel felt the contrast so sharply it almost stole her breath. Only months ago, she had been standing in her mother's kitchen, treated as little more than a tool. Back then, she thought revenge would mean letting her family suffer the consequences of her absence, watching them scramble without her. And maybe it had in a way. But sitting here now, she realized revenge had become something else entirely. It wasn't about punishing them. It wasn't even about making them understand. It was about reclaiming the dignity they had stripped from her, about proving, to herself most of all, that she was worth more than the role they had forced on her. Ethan lifted his glass, smiling across the table. To new beginnings. Rachel returned the smile, a warmth spreading through her chest. She raised her own glass, the reflection of the candlelight dancing in the wine. For the first time in a very long time, her voice was steady, unshaken. "I'm finally living on my own terms." The words hung between them, quiet but powerful, like a vow spoken into existence. Ethan clinked his glass gently against hers, and the sound rang out like a soft promise. Outside, rain continued to fall, but Rachel no longer felt weighed down by storms. She had walked through them, drenched and exhausted, only to discover that she didn't need to wait for anyone else to hand her an umbrella. She had built her own shelter, her own sunshine. The future was uncertain. Family ties frayed, apologies half-formed, questions unanswered. Maybe one day she would find a way to rebuild some kind of relationship with her parents. Maybe not. But that decision no longer defined her worth. What defined her was this moment, this freedom, this choice to step forward without chains. And that, Rachel thought as she lifted her glass once more, was the sweetest revenge of all. Because sometimes revenge isn't about shouting or fighting or watching someone else lose. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is quiet, just the sound of your own laughter echoing in a life you finally chose for yourself.